Oconee County Planning Commission this Monday, September 19th at 5:03. Our first order of business is invocation. Mr. Pat, would you please lead us in prayer?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Let us pray. Father, we thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to serve the public, Lord. And Father, we pray that you guide us and lead us, Lord, Father, in the words we use and the thoughts we think, Lord, and that we use your grace and your willingness, Lord, to make important decisions for this county, Father. Pray, Lord, that you watch over all our public servants, Lord, and keep them safe as they're working and traveling, Father, that you give them travel mercies, Lord. Lord, we pray that thank you for this beautiful day that you've provided us, Father. These things we ask in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Alex, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Approval of the minutes for September 8th meeting. Have a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Any corrections or changes to those minutes?
No.
If none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay.
Unanimous?
Yes.
Do we have any public comment? Okay, we have no public comment for non-agenda items. Commission member comments?
I got some, sir, if ain't nobody else does.
Go ahead.
All right, gentlemen and ladies, I have spent today at the ER in Oconee Hospital. The reason I bring that up is we called my mother's family doctor for an emergency. They told us they could see us next Friday, 10 days from now. We called our pulmonologist. They can see us next March. They sent us to the emergency room where they were hanging from the walls. I bring that up because of our growth in our county, which is totally uncontrolled. We're growing way too fast. Our medical systems can't handle what we have. We're still expecting tremendous growth. Our schools are taxed, our emergency services are taxed. And I say all that saying this subdivision, this development issue that we're facing, that we've been dragging out for the last 6 or 8 months, needs attention, and it needs a solution quick. We have got to control our growth, because it's going to get to the point, gentlemen, that one of us, ladies, we may need a medical emergency or a medical attention that we cannot get because we have too many people in this county. And it's going to happen. I've seen it today. I've seen people laying in the hallways of the hospital sick that could not get any attention because we have no doctors. And it's just because the population is outgrowing the people coming into the profession. So I don't know if subdivision standards or something, or building standards, we have got to slow the population growth down in this county. We just have to, for not only just for those reasons only. Thank you.
Anyone else? This is just general information. We have a farm-to-table, I don't know what to call it, a banquet or something.
It's an agricultural appreciation banquet.
That's it. And that is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at the Fair Oak Youth Center, which is the old Oakley High School. From what I understand, there wasn't a charge for this. They're going to have a couple of different speakers. It is all local stuff that they cook and prepare, and it's usually a pretty nice little get together, and you learn a little bit more about the agricultural needs and what we have in this county. And let's just let y'all know that that's happening tomorrow. So without anything else.
Frankie, I was just going to add to that the Foothills Farmstead behind there is having a drop-in. So if you do go to that banquet, walk around to the back and
visit the house that they're building behind there.
Oh, and the Heritage Fair opens up tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Okay, if there's not anything else, we'll move on to staff comment.
I don't have anything for you this evening.
Nothing. Question, we have any other subdivisions applied for?
Not yet.
Well, I keep seeing signs up, but I don't know.
As soon as those applications come in, you'll get them. Y'all will get a copy of them.
Because I just saw a sign out on Highway 11, at Beeman's Supply out that way. Property there were some subdivision was.
Area Springs, that's been approved for a while.
Oh, it's already approved? Oh. I just saw the sign today.
Is there one, somebody put in a application for one up next to the high school,
I'm not familiar with that yet. Is that,
Walhalla High School?
okay.
Yeah, you'll get it soon.
Okay, let's go into discussion of planning commission involvement in land use and subdivision approval process. Did any of y'all have a chance to look over the Pickens County Unified Development Standards?
I've looked at them previously, Mr. Chairman, when we had the subdivision committee. That's a pretty substantial document there and pretty detailed. My concern to that is the density for multi-unit housing is pretty much, it don't have a density, to my recollection that I recall. And that's kind of something I think we need to approach is the number of houses you can build on a lot or units you can put on a lot. But I don't see that it could work either way. Either you build a lot in one spot or you build a few in one spot and they just build in more places. So so there's really not a win-win there. In my eyes, if we do, try to make our own plan, I think we do need to have a density
Portion of it.
portion, in the multi-unit section. Also, I think we've discussed this before. A lot of these subdivisions I've been riding around looking at have got just multiple driveways off very extremely busy roads. I know it costs money, and we always talk about affordable housing. But we need to limit driveways going into some of these subdivisions to where they all enter from the inside, if possible. When you're putting 8, 10, 12 driveways in a 400 or 500 foot section of an extremely busy road, that is a disaster waiting to happen. And speaking of affordable housing, I've been watching a little project going on over in Greenville. There's ways to build affordable housing even in this economy, even with these costs. So let's just kind of keep that in mind, that anything we do, affordable housing can be built. They actually building some affordable housing on the west end of Greenville amongst some $500,000 homes. So affordable housing can be achieved if it's approached properly. And I don't know that any development restrictions that we institute would be any headwinds to something like that.
What is Greenville considering affordable housing?
That's a good question. Less than 180, 175, I believe. It's on the west end this way. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of it, but it's already a development process going on, and they're going to put 180 to 200 houses in this unit.
What's the density?
I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to.
Those are the two factors that affect affordable housing.
Right. Well, there's already houses here, and they're building these, actually blending these affordable housing in amongst these $250,000, $300,000 houses. I think they can make the outside of them look the same. They just change what's on the inside as far as, I guess, the quality of things. But they have, I think they're going to do 160 or 70. They got almost 2,000 applicants. So for this housing.
Are they getting subsidies in order to do it?
Yeah. It's government subsidized. Correct.
Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I wanted to take the conversation in a different direction. The standards that I saw, something really significant that I saw in the Pickens document was Chapter 12, and it's 1205, and this is something kind of what you were talking about last Thursday about if the commission gets more involved in approving subdivisions, and then would be kind of set up like the BZA, and then how do we have a hearing and how do we raise questions? Well, right here in Pickens, it's 1205. They have standards for land use approval consideration, and they have questions to be asked for the land use permit for each subdivision. A, is the proposed use consistent with other uses in the area or the general development patterns? B, will the proposed use not adversely affect the existing use or usability of adjacent properties? C, is the proposed use blah, blah, blah. And it goes all the way to F. So it's really 6 excellent questions when looking at a proposal for a subdivision that could be really helpful if this commission indeed wants to have hearings and scrutinize developments when they apply to build. Can you pull that up, James? Maybe everybody can look at those questions that I'm talking about.
You know, that's the only one I didn't get, that I didn't have copied off. This whole document, I don't think we need this complete document for Oconee County, but there are parts of it that we could, take some things out of and use them. It's like any other ordinance. We take out what it works best for this county, the rest of it we leave alone, leave it in Pickens. We just take out the stuff that we know that'll work in Oconee County and it would benefit the citizens of this county. That way we're not reinventing the wheel. We've already got the basic stuff down and we just reword it or whatever we have to do to get it to work for this county.
So are we going over 8 right now, or are we going over 9 right now? Are we talking about us controlling it, or are we talking about the standards in general? And the only reason I ask that is that Ms. Spicer is correct. There's a series of questions that we can ask to be asked. James does that now already, but it's all for the guidelines that are in black and white. We've got to come up with the guidelines in black and the white before we can ask those questions to check those boxes. And then we have to determine, are we going to check the boxes, or are we going to have staff check the boxes? Right now, staff checks the boxes. We just need to come up with more discussion on number 9 that says, what boxes do we need to make sure get checked?
That's why I like these standards for the consideration, because they weren't James's in terms of just, has DHEC checked it? Has Roads and Bridges been there? Like those kind of standard things. This is more looking at the big picture when somebody applies.
And this would also be a way to get the planning commission more involved in the discussion of these housing developments. Would keep us up to date on what's coming into the county. And we can have it set up to where we're not gonna look at anything unless it's, say, 20, 30 homes being built. Anything smaller than that, staff handles it, we don't even know about it. But if it's like 30 homes or bigger, then we get involved in looking at the plans and making sure that they're following what rules that we have.
Ms. Spicer, you were going to talk.
To Mr., excuse me, Frankie, but to Mr. Williams' point about our infrastructure being taxed, like letter D, which is the 4th question for consideration, is this: will the proposed use not cause an excessive or burdensome use of public facilities or services, including but not limited to streets, schools, water, sewer, utilities, police, or fire? That's a great question. And that's a great question whenever a proposal comes in. That's a great question to ask.
So that is a terrific question. The question beyond that, though, is for Mr. Root, because, and I'm not an attorney, but it sounds like that is a subjective question, and we can't do subjective questions without getting the potential of getting sued.
Without
As a
having
county.
standard.
without, we have to have a standard to say, are you meeting this standard, yes or no? Not a subjective opinion of, do we think that this might be a task on something or not a task on something as a county? It would be interesting to see how Pickens is handling it.
James, what do you ask these developers when they come in and want to do the subdivision? Do you ask this type of question to them?
No, we check it against the ordinances that exist. So if they're in a control-free district, they're in a control-free district. If they're in a lake district or like residential or traditional residential, agricultural residential or traditional ag, we apply those standards to the application. It's not a question of, is it consistent? It is, it either is in that zoning or it's not.
It's a great question, and the example is South Cove, the subdivision that Seneca approved there in South Cove that's going to offload right there at the CVS and task that intersection that's already insanely packed with traffic is talking about an extra 900 car traffic per day hitting that intersection from South Cove to the CVS. And that question that Ms. Spicer brought up would have helped address that. But how is Pickens getting away with it when Mr. Root says we can't be subjective in our opinion on something, that it needs to be black and white rules?
Yeah, that's a good question, because here's another one of your questions. It's number 6. Does the proposed use reflect a reasonable balance between the promotion of the public health, safety, morality, general welfare, and the right to unrestricted use of property? I mean, I don't know how Pickens answers that question, but these are all very thought-provoking questions when somebody submits a request.
Well, we had our emergency services director in here a few weeks ago, a month ago, and he stood right there and said, our standards are not strong enough. And what he was talking about was road width. And, that they just are not up to codes.
Are you talking about emergency
Stop
director?
crying.
He actually said we didn't need the space. He said he needed 30 feet, not 50 feet.
Well, we talking about outside the road itself. We're talking about two different things. I'm talking about road width itself.
Right. Our county standards of 20 feet.
Yes, our road widths are not big enough, the cul-de-sacs are not big enough.
Yes,
Our
that's
emergency service director sit there and said that. So I think that should take precedence over, well, that should be the first thing we change. We got to make emergency access reasonably safe. That's right there is a no-brainer.
You were talking about changing the density for these subdivisions and all. The biggest problem with that is all of these subdivisions are going into control-free areas. There is no standards in control-free. There is no density. There is only setbacks for how far you got to build this house from the property lines. All of our other bad word zoning classifications have density. Some are half-acre lots, some are quarter-acre lots, some are 1 per 5 acres. It goes on. Control-free has nothing. So if we start putting regulations in, we have to make sure we only do it for subdivisions or housing developments, not the general public. Everybody else, say me or you, we'd stay control-free with no standard, but if we start to build a subdivision or a housing development, whatever you want to call it, these are the standards you have to follow, regardless where you are in this county. That would work. If we did that, they would have to abide by these if they're in residential, control-free, wherever. It wouldn't just be one zoning classification. If this was how a subdivision is supposed to be built, that would pertain to all zoning classifications. Am I correct? If we set standards on how development is done, it would go through all zoning classifications, not just.
It would depend on how you worded it and how you wrote it.
Okay. So we could write one that just dealt with subdivisions in control-free areas.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
You would want to ask your attorney
But I mean,
that
it'd be better if we did one that covered the entire county regardless of your zoning, rather than picking out a particular classification
I
and
would
set
think
rules for
would
that
apply more
classification.
equally to all landowners and be a fair,
But we're not wanting to bother equal landowners. We're wanting to manage subdivisions, not private individuals. Not a private property such as myself. We're wanting
a
to,
subdivision regardless of its zoning classification.
right. Okay, Mike.
So Frank is correct in that a lot of the traffic and a lot of the population growth is coming to this area. They're working in Greenville, they're working in Georgia, they're coming here because of our control-free nature.
Exactly.
One of the things that would be great to ask Mr. Root is while we don't have an appetite for changing or adding zoning to our area, maybe there would be an appetite that if somebody came in and said, we would like to buy this 75-acre tract and we would like to build whatever trigger number that is, whether that's 20 homes, 50 homes, 200 homes, at some point when they said we'd like to build X amount of homes, it triggers that you then fall under a residential zoning standard as opposed to the control-free standard, which is what Frankie's talking about. That all of a sudden, when you turn in, I've got a survey here for 50 homes, it now puts you in a residential category, whether that's a rural residential, a straightforward residential, ag category, whatever, it would roll it into a residential category, which then would start restricting zoning and things like that. In other words, we could, instead of doing across the board even, we could simply come up with development standards for residential, and then proposed X number of homes throws you into residential even though you were currently zoned control-free. You're changing the use. There's been a conversation about we can't spot zone, but the tax office does take and do rollback taxes from ag land to residential development. In other words, the tax office legally says we can change the use for 5 years back. So if the tax office can change the use for 5 years back, why can't we say we're not spot zoning you from a top-down approach, we are letting you zone yourself because you just submitted an application for 75 homes. So it'd be nice to find.
I kind of like that idea. I think that's not a bad idea. Before we get too down the track on that one, what do you think about this? So our definitions in 32 has a very kind of a weak, I think, definition of what a minor subdivision is. But I found another for Gaffney's subdivision regs, they have a really good minor subdivision definition and major subdivision. So minor basically is 3 lots or less with no new streets, and a major subdivision would be 4 or more lots with new streets created. So if we can differentiate, at least as that as a starting point, what's a minor subdivision, what's a major, and really our attention would be toward the major subdivisions where there's new streets created, we can kind of separate everything out that way.
So the one area that doesn't address is where Pat was talking about how we have entries onto main thoroughfares of roads. One of the issues that's happening in subdivisions is where there's the normal idea of bringing a road in and you having houses that back the major road, front the minor road, and then houses on the other side of the minor road. What you're doing, a developer saving money by building a house up next to the road, then building a long driveway that accesses 2 houses in the back, then building another house up next to the road, then building a long driveway to the back, and it saves them that $250,000 in construction of a road. If we have to be careful of doing major or minor or new road, because they'll just turn and not do that road, which is what we're trying to encourage them to do now, and they're not. Instead, they're building driveways every 50 feet.
Okay, you're telling me they're going to cheat, Mr. Johnson?
I'm sorry?
You're telling me they're going to cheat?
The place I was talking about there off Highway 11, right there at Beeman's, that's a perfect example of them putting, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen the plans, but more than likely, they've got driveways coming off of Highway 11.
They do.
And then they're
That's-
gonna
that's
have,
my
also
example.
have,
That's my example where I was
they're gonna
talking
have
about.
driveways coming off of that road behind this subdivision, or in front of it, which way, ever how you wanna come. That road is maybe at its widest point, 12 feet.
Right.
I don't even think it's 12 feet. I used to live on that road, but they're gonna have entrances or exits or whatever on that road, and that's why I griped about this one over here on Mountain Road. And Claremont Road is, to me, an old country road. This is a perfect example of an old country road. It's barely wide enough for two cars to pass, much less anything else, but yet the state, because that would be a state road because it connects two state highways, so it's considered a state road, but it's barely wide enough to accommodate the traffic it has now. Once they get those homes built, it's gonna be even worse, and it's not gonna withstand, the road structure is not built to withstand that much more traffic. So it's gonna be beat up, potholes, everything else in it, so there's got to be something we can say, yeah, you can build off, you can have your entrance off of Highway 11, but you can't have one on this road, because you don't need a front entrance and a back entrance. We're not robbing a bank and having to get out the back way.
I disagree wholeheartedly, sir. I think the entrance should be on that road. But here's the issue. We can't tell DOT what to do on their roads.
If we have an ordinance, we can. They
I'm
will
not
follow.
sure,
They will
James,
follow.
is that might be a county road. Is that a county road, do you know? Area Springs?
Is that area? Is that what that one
Yeah, it's
goes?
called Area
Goes
Springs.
behind
But,
Demons.
I mean, that's a case in point. You're making a great point, Mr. Chairman. That road should have never been ever even approved to have heavy traffic on it. You're right, you're 100% right about that. But we have no way to, we are so lax in our regulations, we have no way to control any of that, or at least advise. You know, so that goes back to my point where I made here. We supposed to be talking about subdivision approval process. I think, number one, a public comment period has got to be important. We got to let adjacent landowners know what's gonna happen. Even before DOT approves access or Blue Ridge or Public Services, we have got to let the public know what's happening in their neighborhoods. I brought that up before, when we had our subdivision committee. You know, it should be posted, what's happening. Have a public comment period on a Thursday at 7 o'clock and give the public the opportunity to discuss their concerns. And that's kind of part of what we talking about here on number 8, subdivision approval process. I think we kind of get the horse in front of the cart here just a while ago, but a public comment period, we should be do our citizens, give them that opportunity to speak up.
So one of the things we talked about last meeting was that many times the citizens don't understand what the rules are, the law is, or even the process.
Right.
We talked about last time how I'd said there were a couple hundred pages of standards right now, and we determined that there were 23. This is actually the book that developers have to follow. It's about 200 pages of development-oriented standards for Oconee County. Most of the public doesn't understand half of that process. A concern that I would have if we let the public just generally say what their opinion is, do we let the public then determine what color somebody's house should be, or what kind of car they drive, or how loud their stereo should play? I mean, we're getting into an area of opinion that now we've extended out to the public that you're always going to find 6 people compared to one owner. I mean, that owner is still the owner. Remember, a developer never buys property until they can do what they want to do with it. Until then, it's the owner. He's owned it for 5 years or 30 years. He's still the owner, and he has rights as well. And right now, that owner is working under the rights of, if I ever want to do something, I've got to fall within these rules of this book. And what you're suggesting is that we're throwing away the book and telling the owner, you better be nice to your neighbors and buy them Christmas presents, because they're going to vote against you if you ever want to sell your land. And I want to make sure that we're cautious about that as an organization. I completely agree that we've got to deal with control free, because that's why people are coming here and not stopping in Powdersville. I think we deal with that, again, I'd like to ask Mr. Root if we could deal with that by making somebody then fall under a different category. And then we develop standards within residential. I've heard everything from density issues to traffic issues to cutting down everything down to the red dirt issues. And I think all of those things are things that we can deal with. I mean, we have a road studies plan, maybe we just need to make it tighter. We have roads and bridges under 26 as to how they should build the road. But we also have to watch out. We either have to throw out the window entirely this affordable housing because it won't exist, or we have to try to come up with some balance as to what a developer can do.
How does Greenville, gonna be building affordable housing, they have strict standards, have more than anybody that, I mean, they got all kind of rules and regulations on how you build stuff, but yet they can build homes for 180,000, or someone is. Why can't Oconee do something similar and have some basic rules? We're not
They're
asking,
subsidizing it somehow.
but we're not wanting to stifle everything. We're just wanting some basic common sense rules that says, hey, build 2-3 houses an acre.
So Greenville
Don't clear
does
cut
it, and I'm not an expert on Greenville, but Greenville does it by increasing density, which we're talking about not letting density occur. So we're talking about don't do density, but Greenville builds affordable housing by creating density.
Well, I brought it up, we gotta choose one or the other.
And that's really what it comes down to, is we have to choose one or the other, and we have to stand behind that choice.
Because as a land preservationist, or whatever you want to call me, I'm smart enough to know that if we institute a density standard, well, then it's going to build more houses in more places. Is that clear? I mean, I think you understand that question. So
Well,
if we can give them to build 10 on 1 acre and leave this 10 acres alone, well, that would be fine. But could that happen?
So are you talking about creating green space within a subdivision, or are you talking about a particular area of the county that they build versus not an area?
But I mentioned the sewer overlay last time, and that got shot down like a cheap cannon. But if we can institute a sewer overlay where the developers want to go where sewer is,
Absolutely.
well, I mean, for me, build all you want. Just leave the country. Let's maybe incentivize these landowners to preserve their land. Outside that sewer zone, that overlay that we proposed. And back to your question, I'm sorry, Mike, Frankie, I think a lot of the building going on in Anderson, Pickens, Oconee County is because of standards, or is because of zoning. Those developers and those builders have that protection, and I think it incentivizes quality building, affordable building. I don't think it's a discouragement at all, or a hindrance to any builder. I mean, control-free zone, I believe they would be people that look at us, and James can say yeah or no, but I would think there's potential developers like, boy, I don't know if I want to be in a control-free zone, because what can happen beside me? I don't know if that's a concern or not, but.
I'd like to make a motion, we move item number 8 to our next agenda, because we are doing nothing but talking about item 9. So, and until Mr. Root comes at our next meeting to give us a little more advice about that particular item, do we need to table it, or?
You can table it, you can postpone it, you can.
I make a motion, we postpone it till our next meeting, and then with Mr. Root, we can talk about that in more depth, because we seem to be on housing development standards more than planning commission's involvement in looking at plans, so.
I'll second.
Mr. Chair, isn't our next meeting gonna be the in-depth discussion of junkyards? Do we really wanna move it to that one, or move it out one more?
Okay, we have to say, open it up for discussion. What do y'all think?
I don't know that we should have it. Go ahead.
I was saying we could probably move it out, like
David suggested.
Amend the motion to move it to our, this will be the October, our second meeting in October.
Second. I second that.
And discussion-wise, that is, we're moving item A
Item 8.
out to that time, and we're going to ask Mr. Root specifically, how is Pickens getting away with these subjective type questions?
Right.
Okay.
And then asked if we can do the moving, like if you build so many homes, you automatically be moved to a residential classification rather than,
So we'll ask him that under development standards, or if that's even possible.
right, and I will ask him that question as well, but because I'm pretty sure development standard will be back on the agenda as well, but we just seem to be talking about more housing development standards rather than the other, so let's just move that out to the second meeting in October. So I have a motion
Seconded motion.
and a second, so all those in favor?
We got a discussion?
That's what we were doing, sir.
Okay.
I mean, go
My
ahead.
part of the discussion is, gentlemen, I don't think we're prepared. If we come to these meetings, gentlemen, we've got to have involvement from the whole commission. We've got two of us doing a lot of talking, the rest of us doing a lot of looking. If your heart's not in the development and use of this county, you got to speak up. I mean, you are representing people in your district, and you're being awful quiet.
Okay,
I hate to step on toes, but
we're talking about item number 8 on the agenda.
That's what I'm talking
the
about.
Planning Commission's involvement.
that's right. Planning Commission's involvement, but we got three guys doing all the talking.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem.
Was the motion seconded?
Yes,
Okay, is there a vote?
we're taking a vote now. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Which way you going, Ms. Spicer?
I'm an aye.
You and I.
6-1.
6-1.
So at our October meeting, our second October meeting, we'll bring this subject back up. But now let's go ahead and continue our discussion.
I want to comment on something Mr. Williams said about a sewer overlay idea.
Can't do that now.
I think that's a pretty good one. If you're here's why I was thinking about it.
Ms. Spicer, hang on just a
Like
minute.
Highway
Move that next
59,
question.
where there's sewer and they're building developments. I went into the Taquina Trail. It's a new housing development there. It was 68 homes on 25 acres. The average lot size is 0.13 to 0.30. So it's kind of small. It's pretty dense, but it's right there on on 59. And I thought, that's not a bad idea. Follow sewer's going down 59. Maybe we do an overlay or talk about an overlay for 59. That idea of an overlay corresponds to our comp plan in chapter 11, 11.1.4.2, develop overlay districts primarily along community entrances, highway corridors. So we'd be working with our comp plan with that idea, and it might be a pretty good one to look at that area as a start. What do you guys think?
Thank you.
All right, so let's continue the discussion of subdivision housing development standards. Item number 9 on the agenda.
One of the things that I just want to say is if we have too much growth coming too fast and the economy doesn't balance it, the market doesn't somehow take care of it for us, then, we do have to govern it. We do need to slow it down for obvious reasons. We can't handle too much growth too fast. So I'm wondering if it's a very simple idea, and I'm sure Mr. Root's got 10 reasons why it wouldn't work, but we should be able to think about if the problem is numbers, let's address the numbers. In other words, if we need to limit growth, let's somehow have an ordinance that limits growth, which could be something like no more than 300, no more than 800, whatever the number is, residents can come in within one annual year, within one calendar year. Right? And then that way you could limit people would have to get in line the next year and say, hey, we can't approve anymore, we reached our limit this year. It's a very simple idea, there's probably good reasons why it wouldn't work, but I wanted to get the idea out there, because what we're trying to do is limit growth, and we need to try to address limiting the growth.
I don't know that we're trying to limit, we're just trying to manage the growth. I do not like the word control. What I'm more concerned with is managing it. And I guess in a way that would be maybe limiting the growth that comes into the county. But the density will manage it, will determine how many homes you can build on said 100 acres. That'll limit the growth. I mean, that's one way to do it, because you can only build so many houses on an acre. I mean, we've got to come up with some standards just for these housing developments. You know, tell them that you can only build 3 homes an acre, and your lot size has to be 1/3 of an acre. What is the Cliffs? Pretty much everything the Cliffs do, Kiwi Key, is half-acre lots. I don't think they do anything less than a half-acre. But again, all of this is happening in a control-free area, so we're gonna have pushback from everyone that lives in control-free going, nope, you can't tell me what I can do with my property because this is control-free. They don't understand it's still not technically
I don't
control-free.
know, Mr. Chairman, once that property owner sells his property though, you know, that buyer has the choice of what to do with it. So, I mean, is that?
Once a developer buys property, to me, and I may be wrong, and I'll probably get phone calls tomorrow, but he's no longer a private citizen, he's a business. If he's buying that land to build homes, he turns into a business rather than a private citizen. And we regulate or tell a lot of different businesses they have to do things a certain way. Why not do the same thing with developers?
To interject, the problem is he's not gonna buy the land until you tell him in advance what he's able to do. That's the difference, that's why we have to put it down in black and white, whatever we're gonna put down, so that the determination is already there. Because again, they're not going to invest in something until they've already gone through all the process of approvals, and then they'll buy the land. So so a lot of this conversation is we've got to get it in black and white.
Go ahead.
So what constitutes a property owner? An individual, a developer, everybody's a property owner. Whoever buys the property is the property owner. It's like Mike said, the only way, I mean, you really can't differentiate an individual that owns the property from somebody that's had it for 40 years or the guy that comes in and buys it from him to develop it. They're both property owners and they both have the same rights. So the only way, in my mind, you're gonna put something in place to do anything as far as control growth or manage growth is, I think Mike's got a good idea, and that is whenever somebody decides they're gonna develop that property and they submit that application, they're zoning themselves into a different zone criteria. And that's the way you manage it. And then you got a set of rules you can apply to that criteria, that zoning. And they know it's coming when they buy it, before they buy it. They say, okay, I'm buying this piece of property. I want to put 80 houses on this 40 acres. Here's the rules I have to follow to do it. I think it's as
Sounds
simple.
too simple.
Well, it does
That's a
sound
great
simple, and
idea,
I'm struggling with this whole deal. I mean, I'm a big property rights fan. I think the developer has every bit as much right to manage the property. He's a property owner just like anybody else is a property owner. A business is owned by an individual. They have rights. They have property rights. We have to acknowledge that. But I agree there is some struggle, and I've had a lot of discussion with people that are very conservative and very strong on property rights, and it's a struggle for us. But I do recognize that the county is potentially, population-wise, outgrowing the infrastructure. So we have to do something, but we have to do something that's legally viable that Mr. Root can, so we don't end up in litigation, and we have to, it has to be something that's fair to everybody and that applies across the board. Whenever somebody, and I think the decision of how you use the property is probably a good criteria for how you apply the rules to that person. Once they, whether it's an individual, you could have a person that's on there 40 acres for 40 years and they develop it. So now the rule has to apply to them. They're not, what we consider an out-of-county entity that comes in and buys a property and develops. They're an individual. So it has to apply consistently. And I think Mike's got a good idea that I think we should at least put on paper.
Then we can go back to our existing zoning. If that's the case, we can go back to our existing zoning. We can tighten it up if we need to, which we do. Tighten those areas up, and then whatever you submit is what you fall into. That way it's not any kind of top-down zoning. It's a self-imposed, I now fall under these regulations, if it's legal for us to do.
People have the choice. They make the choice on their own. It's not forced top-down. I like
So
that.
right now, we have rural residential is 1 house per 5 acres. What's interesting, according to preserving land though, is if you're agriculture, you're 1 house per acre. If you're rural residential, you're 1 house per 5 acres. Doesn't make sense to me in a zoning standard.
I agree with you.
So I think there should be some adjustments potentially to the zoning standards to make them make more sense. But under some of our residential, it's 1 house per half acre. But under control free, if you can get them on .123, you get them on .123 in our control free. So that's where they're going, and that's why they're coming here, is because they can do something they can't do in Greenville or Powdersville or Easley or Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna say a word you don't like. Subcommittee. I think a lot of this discussion does need to be done in a subcommittee. I don't think up here, tossing our ideas around will get us anywhere fast. I would like to us form a subcommittee. If you gentlemen are interested, I'll be involved. Ms. Spicer, if you're interested. But we need to do a lot of discussion when we can really sit down and really iron it out. Go ahead.
My concern about the subcommittees, and I mentioned it before, is the public is not able to view it the way in a room or in a boardroom table, the way they're able to view it now and online and things like that, to the degree that they are. And we've had a discussion about putting things in place that are subjective, where, like you said, the neighbors have the right to come and complain about something that's going in. If the neighbors are going to complain, they need to do it here in this room before we create something, not at the point at which somebody just painted their house chartreuse and complaining that their neighbor's house is now chartreuse. This is the point at which people should voice the opinion so that we can put it in black and white, so that we can say, yes, you can do something, or no, you can't, because here are the rules.
With the subcommittee, though, we can really get some fine details down, and they're open to the public, correct, James? I mean, we've done them. We can save, I think, a lot of time, a lot of scrutiny, and we can come with an idea, and then if it's approved, it's approved. If it's not, we start over.
So what's interesting, though, is when we started this, and I'm not saying that I'm completely objectionable to this. I just think that it should be more the public and more of this committee. But one of the things that I'm still surprised about is when we started this discussion several months ago, it was, I just drove by a place and everything was cleared and there's a subdivision going in. Well, was it the subdivision or was it the clearing? And half of us would say, well, it's because they clear cut everything, and half of it would say because they're building a subdivision over here. I think that we still need, as an entire committee, to at least get 6 points down, or 5 points, or 3 points that says, this is what we need to address. You had mentioned, is it the sheer numbers aspect of it? I think that's a very valid point. Maybe that's item 1 or item 2. Is it clear cutting? Is that an item? And then we take those 5 items and then let the subcommittee start trying to hammer out what that looks like, once we've determined as a group what items we're going to be discussing, so that the public at least knows what items are being discussed.
That's a great point, because it is a lot easier to do a subcommittee when you have workable ideas. when you got some points to work with.
Mr. Pat, I just want to say something to you directly. You were calling us out for not speaking, but one of the reasons why I'm not speaking, I want you to know, is because some of the things that y'all are talking about are not in the form of a motion. And y'all are debating things that are not in the form of a motion. And I'd appreciate it if you would go by the order.
I respect that, Mr. Garland.
I'd like to make a motion. Pat, you might help me on this. I'd like to make a motion that we come up with a set of criteria that would place a potential developer who chooses to develop into a different zoning category other than control-free. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
A
I just
set
don't
of
know if it's
criteria.
legal, and that's why it would be good to have Mr. Root's opinion.
Need to have a second.
I'll second that so we can get to the discussion on it.
I don't know if it's, I think it would be a great thing to do, potentially. That was just an idea that came out, but I think Mr. Root needs to tell us if it's even possible for somebody to self-zone like that. Because right now, we have a rule that says you can't self-zone if you have less than 20 acres, 50 acres?
50 acres.
50.
So are we now saying, going against our own ordinance of the 50, and do we need to change that one? Because you've just gone in on 35 acres and said, here's a subdivision I want to build. So I think that Mr. Root probably needs to jump in and tell us what we can do and how we go about doing it.
I would like to understand the basis for the 50 acres, why it's not 20, 15. I think
Spot zoning,
Mr.
I
Root
believe.
could probably help us on that.
It's
Wasn't it-
essentially to avoid spot zoning.
Yeah. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table.
Okay, could you repeat the motion, please?
I make a motion that we develop a set of criteria which would apply to a potential developer who is applying for a development on a piece of property that would potentially zone him from control-free into some other type of zoning that would control the development or the subdivision development criteria. I think that's the same thing I said a while ago, roughly.
It was what you said, and I'm confused. I understand where you're going, I think, but I'm not sure. Are you wanting to come up with something? Are you wanting to come up with a set of standards that we plug into an existing zone that they would then follow once they hit that zone?
No.
Or are you wanting to say, here's the rules, if you do this, then this happens?
That's right, that's the
Okay.
latter.
Okay.
This would be a land development standard, basically, I think, stating that if you're doing this on this land, such as building homes or what have you, you would automatically go to a residential, like the same thing.
Or one of the categories.
Or one of
You
the
have
other
to- You have to
categories.
pick one of these other categories. You just can't continue to stay
Right, you
control-free.
can't stay control-free.
So here's the other advantage to that, in my mind, for the adjacent property owners. Right now, if somebody has a 50-acre tract or whatever, they can go sell it to a developer between these other folks with 100-acre tracts around it, and the developer can pretty much do what they want. Whereas if we come up with a set of criteria that would apply to the developer who has decided to apply for a development or a subdivision, then we could be, I hate to say, they're applying it to themselves when they choose to develop it, however they choose to develop it.
Absolutely.
So it's not, in my mind, necessarily top-down zoning.
And when you say a
It
series
is,
of
it's a
criteria.
form of self-zoning.
Yeah, absolutely. When you say develop criteria, are you talking about densities and road standards and clearing and things like that? Or are you talking about that simply here's a number, a trigger point, that if you say over X number of homes, then you're now going to fall?
I think that,
The trigger point.
yeah,
Okay.
I think the
So we
number
need
of
to come up
homes
with
per, the number of homes in the development, the size of the development, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And I have no idea what those are. I mean, those have to be discussed. I just think that's a good starting point.
Well, it seems like the easiest point is 50 acres if you need 50 acres. As a starting point, we would have to change that to some degree if it were, say, a 20-acre development.
And that's where we need Mr.
Yeah.
Root to tell us if somebody could do that.
I think if it's over 50 acres, it should be. I can't imagine there's a reason you can't say, if you want to build a subdivision, you have to move into this, for one of these zoning categories. But I don't know if that means you'd have to exclude it from control-free zone, though, which means you'd have to change, say no subdivisions are allowed in control-free zone, because then you force the issue of changing zoning. I don't know. Again, it's probably back to Mr. Root.
To me, I'm afraid the motion would, if it passes, it would possibly restrict us in some ways, and I'm not really comfortable with knowing whether or not we can do it. So that's,
So you would like to hear from Mr. Root first?
I don't want to vote yes on something that actually ends up being not defined well enough to where we know exactly what we're trying to do.
We have to have enough on paper so that Mr. Root can decide, though. We have to have at least some kind of,
So you're wanting us to come up with this is what we want to do, Mr. Root, is this okay?
I mean, I got several questions. What's the basis for the 50-acre self-zoning? When was that rule implemented? Now that we have higher population density, why is it not 20 acres? Why can't we change that? And then the other piece is, the piece about the implementing a set of criteria to a potential developer based on what he's going to develop, to rezone him from no control-free to some kind of residential or other.
Some category that is a zoned
That's
category.
appropriate.
Or you're saying, David, you're saying that the developer has to give the total number of homes to be labeled a certain district? Because right now, like I think Mike, you said it, residential district, it's quarter-acre lots with four is the max density, but what's missing is 100 acres or 100 homes in this group. So is that what you're saying, Dave? You just want a maximum number that he can build on these quarter-acre
No,
lots
that
be
would-
called residential district?
No, that would be the rules that would apply after you decide what zoning you're going to be in. After the checklist that you go through decides what zoning you're going to be upgraded to from control-free.
Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but Ms. Spicer, what I'm envisioning he's saying is that if you as a developer come in and you say, I've got a plan for 178 homes on these 50 acres, that is going to put me, therefore, in residential, some XYZ, or multifamily, or whatever it might be, based on the number the developer is submitting.
And it could be that simple. I mean, it could.
And then we come in and we redevelop these standards that are under existing zoning to make sure they make sense.
Yeah, because right now the zoning is number of homes versus density on number of acres. There's no maximum number to be built. So it's kind of an interesting suggestion, really.
Well, the zoning, what rules are applicable for particular zones is, those don't completely make sense. We could enhance those, but right now we have no tool to address control-free. If somebody wants to go put a development in of a 100-home development in it, we have no controls over
We
that.
have no control of density.
No control, really,
Anything.
right?
Well, we do have control of the road standards.
Sure.
I mean, there are some controls that
Drainage,
exist.
Erosion
But,
control.
and wastewater management and things like that on certain levels, but we don't have density controls at all. Under
Well, you
control
kind of
free.
do, like rural residential is 5 acres, one dwelling per 5 acres. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but it doesn't say you can build a maximum of 200 or 250 or whatever it is.
Right, we're just talking about under control free, because that's where they're coming in. That's why they are coming to Oconee County.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Yeah, so Spicer, where she's voting.
Ms. Spicer?
Aye.
Aye.
That is a
Funny,
6-1.
I'm watching you guys and you're not in sync, there's a delay, it's kind of funny.
That is us. Okay, any further discussion, on the subdivision housing and development standards?
When is this coming back on the agenda? Is it because the next one?
It will be on every agenda till we decide.
Well, I'm just asking because it wasn't.
Except the next agenda, we're only gonna have the one item will be the junkyard. Because it's probably gonna be a long discussion and, you know, everybody likes to keep the meetings as short as possible. So I don't wanna add anything else unless y'all want something else on there, but right now, this will be on the meeting after that. But
Can I make a motion? I'd like Mr. Root to look at these standards for land use approval that Pickens is using, those 6 points, and I guess they were called subjective, but I wouldn't mind hearing his suggestion, or maybe he can tweak it to something that we can use to give us some kind of standards for a year.
We did ask that be part of that October 2nd meeting, is that Mr. Root study
Okay.
those and give us his opinion as to how they're doing it and how they're able to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing further, item number 10,
Motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.